Okay, this is book 4, lines 1 through 30. Ad regina gravi iumdudum saucia cura, but the queen Saucia wounded for some time, iumdudum, by a grave care, grave love, passionate love. Cura can be translated in many ways. Vulnus alet venis et caeco carpiter igni. Venus here is veins. So she's nourishing her vulnus, her wound, with her veins, like with her lifeblood. And caeco carpiter igni. Carpiter, she is plucked. It often has that meaning of plucking a flower. She's consumed, can be that too, by a caeco igni, by a hidden fire. So she's keeping it inside. Again, look at all the words used to describe love. She is Saucia. It is a cura. It's a gravi cura. It is a vulnus. It is igni. So these are all words that are very important when Roman conception of love is being not so great. Anyway, multa viri virtus animo multusque recursat gentis honos. So the subject of recursat is the multa virtus and the multus honos. And here I actually looked it up again because I didn't like our multa that we said yesterday. I would say abundant, the abundant virtue weary of the man, Aeneas, and the abundant honor of his gentis, of his race, of his kind, comes back to her mind. Okay, recursat here is sort of like races back to her mind. Because coro, re, and coro, it's really based on that kind of word. So, so runs back, comes back to her mind. And animo there is a dative of direction. And then his vultus, and here it's often used in the plural. And his vultus, fixed in her heart, clings, and not just his vultus, but the verba, his face and his words are fastened on her heart, and they cling. And that's somewhat repetitive. Okay, because you have to remember that for books 2 and 3, she heard him talking about the fall of Troy and his journey. And so you have to see that, she's been looking at him and hearing him for quite a long time here. About 2,000 lines. And this cura, this love or care, grief, anxiety, cura can mean a lot of things. This cura does not give an easy or placid quiet to her limbs, which means basically she can't sleep. Okay, and quietum is like rest, so it doesn't give a quiet rest to her limbs. So and then the next lines you have postera, and you'd probably it gives you kind of an order here. Postera aurora lustrabat the terras with the foibea lampade. So after Aurora was traversing the lands with his Phoeban lamp, Aurora is the dawn, and de moverat had moved the wet shadows, like the mist, like a morning mist, from the heavens, okay, from the sky, heaven, sky, okay, which you think about what morning is, look, it's misty, and then now it's past that time, okay, so she couldn't sleep, and now it's morning, okay, and then in this way, she ad loquitur, she speaks, she being malesana, and here's a light totis. Malesana is like badly sane equals not sane equals insane. So she's, the insane Dido addresses her one-minded sister. Now, whether that means loving, sympathetic, that she only thinks one way, it's hard to tell. I'll look for an article on that. And so now we have what she says to her sister. Anna soror, Anna's sister, what insomnia, what dreams terrify me agitated. Quis novus hic hospes. And I would use an S tier. Farce is like, what kind of man is this, or who is this man? What a strange or new stranger. Who is this new man, or what is this new man who has walked into our house, into our seats? Okay. And this next part is a little difficult, but I would use the quam for all of these. See the quam in the middle there? How he's holding himself, carries himself in his appearance, ore, and how carrying, I guess, Ferenz again, how he's carrying himself with a brave heart, or strong pecs, and with his weapons. So he's courageous and he's a good warrior. Okay, so he's good looking and a good warrior. Okay. And then she says, and then this is introducing an indirect statement. Credo, I indeed believe, and this is not a vain faith, this is not an empty faith, that he is of the race of the gods. Okay. Or that his race is of the gods. You can say that, actually. I believe indeed, and this is not a vain faith, an empty faith, that his race is of the gods. Yeah, I would use it that way. That Janus is the accusative subject there. And this is somewhat philosophical, and Virgil likes to do this sometimes. Fear arguit. Fear proves or makes clear a degenerate minds. So usually fear brings out the bad in people. But alas, by what fates, but he doesn't have that, basically. Fear usually makes this clear, but he's not degenerate. So that's sort of like saying that he's of strong mind. Alas, how, quibus fatis, by what fates that man has been tossed. And that Jactatus is used in the first 10 lines of the book, so in book 1. So he's literally been thrown in the water by Juno. So this is a word. And we can get into a whole conversation about the fates, but we can do that another time. And then what, draining war he was singing. What draining wars, what exhausting, what horrible, what endured wars he was singing. And then here we get this contrary to fact, conditional. So she's saying the fixum and emotum are the subject, but what's fixum and emotum, what is fixed and unmoved, is the noun clause in the next sentence. The ne cui me winklo velum sociari ugali. So that actually is the subject, that next line. But we don't have to translate it yet. So if it were not sitting fixed and immobile in my mind, in the mind to me, okay? If it were not fixed, but it is fixed, that's why it's conditional contrary to fact, and that cetera is an imperfect subjunctive. That, and this is the noun, that I was not wanting to sociari, to join myself, me, cui, to anyone in the marriage chain, in the chains of wedlock, in the bands of wedlock. Okay, and that velum is also in imperfect subjunctive in a substantive noun clause there. Okay, so those are two subjunctives. After first love has fefelet, has deceived me, having been deceived by death, having been cheated by death. Dekepton here. So the fefelet and the dekepton are somewhat repetitive, but actually that repetitive, the redundancy, sort of helps her point, I guess. She has been deceived. So the first love, which is her love of Zacchaeus, has cheated her or deceived her, cheated by death, or has cheated her, being deceived by death. Okay, and then this line is tough because per tassum fuisset is actually I call it a super pluperfect. Okay, and you can do that. that it is, it should be, I mean, what we learn in school is per tassum esset, but you can make it even further in the past, and so you can do this. If it had not tired me of something. So literally it means if it had not tired me of the marriage bed and of the marriage torch. Okay, the thalami is the bridal chamber or wedlock, and the torch, and that's a metonymy, using those words that are always associated with weddings or marriage. You would use in place of the word marriage. Okay, and this verb pertisum or tied, this is a compound of this, but it's pertidet is an impersonal verb. It tires someone in the accusative who's not mentioned here, which is may, of something in the genitive. And literally, probably in English, you'd want to say, if I had not been tired of or weary of the marriage chamber and of the marriage torches, perhaps, Forsan, I would be able, usually you would have had a subjunctive here, but, and here he says, the indicative instead of the more usual subjunctive, you would want to say, I would have, okay? But it expresses the conclusion in a more positive way, as though it were practically realized. So, it almost like you want to say, I would have been able, perhaps I would be able, potui, to succumb to, and this takes a dative, to yield, huic uni culpa, to this one guilt, to this one fault, to this one weakness. Again, we could talk about the way, whether this is a, I don't know if we could see sin in the sense of like a Christian way of seeing sin, but I will look into this a little bit more. But maybe more like a mistake or a weakness than a moral culpability. Anyway, we'll get into that. Anna, for I confess, fate bor enem, this is fateor as a deponent. I confess that after, excuse me, fata here I would say is death. After the death of my husband, my wretched husband Zacchaeus, and post I would say after the penates had been, the household gods had been scattered because of this, or by means of, or because of fraterna care, because of this fraternal killing. Okay. This guy, solus hic alone.